I've built an automation that can find local businesses based on their business type and location. It uses an openAI assistant to enrich this data. It then parses the results into a Google Sheet. In this video, I'll show you how to build a local business finder. This can be useful if you want to find businesses in a specific location, whose services you want to use, or possibly you could use this for lead generation. Some of the things you'll learn in this video are how to use a search service, in this case we'll use SerpAPI, how to set up and use an openAI assistant, and in make.com we'll see how to use parameters in a webhook URL, and how to paste our search results in a Google Sheet. Here's a brief overview of this automation. It consists of two make scenarios, a trigger scenario and a toolbox scenario. In the trigger scenario, we provide a business type and location to the SerpAPI service. This will return search results, which we'll all hand over to an openAI assistant. The openAI assistant has two tools available in the toolbox scenario. One is to search the web, where it goes and visits the company's website to return more information. Then it combines that information and hands it over again to the toolbox scenario, where it will be pasted into a Google Sheet. If you're looking for a detailed guide on how to build this application, head over to duative.shop. Once you're on duative.shop, you can find a local business finder among some other automations. If you open a detail page, you can see a description of the automation and you can get an impression through some screenshots. It also tells you what other services need to be in place in order to make this automation work. If you do choose to purchase this automation, you'll have access to all the blueprints and a detailed instruction manual. You'll also have access to future updates at no additional cost. Now let's start building this automation. We'll start in make.com by creating a new scenario. Now I can build this from scratch, but to speed things up, I'm using my blueprint. For the trigger scenario, it's also good to point out that I already have my connections in place, but I'll point out what to look for later on. We're going to connect with SerpAPI and the openAI assistant. Let me first show you how to set these up. To set up SerpAPI, go over to serpapi.com and create your account. You'll then get an API key that you need to set in your make.com connection. You can see that SerpAPI is free for up to 250 searches a month, so for light use, this is more than enough. The next thing we'll do is set up an openAI assistant. To set this up, you need a paid openAI account and head over to assistants. Now I already have this one made here. It's called the local business finder. And what it has here is system instructions. It says your role is a local business search assistant. You can make sense from a collection of company data. You can visit company websites to enrich the data that you originally received to make sure that you can return all the required information of a company. You can return all the information that you have received and enriched as a JSON object. Then the steps to take is receive the initial data set that resulted from the SerpAPI search, then make sense of the data and look for the website of the company. Then visit the website using the HTTP request function. It's then instructed to look for the email address of the company. Once it's found that, it will return all the information back in the return company details function. Now these two functions are specified here. This is the great thing about openAI assistants, is that you can specify the object to return in great detail. So you can exactly say, this is the JSON object that I expect back, which is very useful because this is what you're going to use to populate the Google Sheet. So you can see for each column in the Google Sheet that we're going to populate, it's describing what data to pick up. It's also, for example, instructing if there's a rating, then use these stars like this. This is the tool for how to return the data. The second tool that we have is an HTTP request, which is simply to make a connection to a URL. That's all for the openAI assistant in a nutshell. Now it's good to point out here that openAI has never released the assistance functionality further than beta release. And they even announced to stop support halfway of next year. So by the time this will stop, we'll have to find another solution for this. And the reason I do still use openAI assistants is the functionality of specifying the output format in great detail. If there's any other way to do this, please let me know in the comments. Once we have set up our SerpAPI account and openAI assistant, we can go back to our make.com trigger scenario and set the connections for these two. First, the SerpAPI. You can add a new connection if you don't have one. All you need is an API key, which you can find in your SerpAPI account. I already have mine, so I'll pre-select this one. Now you'll see some fields pre-populated by the blueprint. You can leave these as they are. I'll explain later what these do. Same for openAI. You can create a new connection if you don't have one. You'll need an API key plus an organization ID, which you can both find in your openAI account. I'll choose the one I have set up already. Again, you'll see some fields pre-populated. I'll come back later to what these do. You can save these connections and save your scenario. The next thing to configure is the first module in this scenario, which holds all the variables for this automation. The first two variables hold a search query. It's the business type and the business location. So you can enter your search query in these two first variables. The third variable is the address for the webhook that we're going to create in the toolbox scenario. The last two variables identify the Google Sheet that we're going to use to populate the search results into. The next thing we're going to do is create our toolbox scenario. We'll do this by creating a new scenario. And again, to speed things up, I have my blueprint ready. Now, once we have the toolbox scenario, we have to set a few modules. The first modules to set is the connection to the Google account. This is the first module that needs the account set. If you don't have a Google account, you can add one here and simply sign up with your Google account. I already have one set up, so I select that one. Again, there are some fields pre-populated. You can leave them as they are. I'll explain later what these do. There's a second Google Sheet module here, which also needs that same account connection. We save those. The last thing to do is to create a webhook, and this is where you create one. I tend to name my webhooks the same as the scenario. So let's add a new webhook and name it the same as the scenario. Once we save that webhook, we get the address here. This is important because we'll need to set this in our trigger scenario. So press the copy address to clipboard button and save this scenario. We can save this and then we'll head back over to our trigger scenario to set the webhook address. Okay, here we are back in our trigger scenario where we can set the webhook URL in this variables module. So here we go to the third variable called the toolbox scenario webhook address. We paste our webhook address here and then save this module. Now, what does this actually do? If we open the openAI module, you can see that it has detected these two functions or tools that we've created for this assistant. It was the HTTP request to make a search, and the second one was the return company details to return all the enriched information. Now, what these do is actually call a webhook address. So what you normally do is probably create two different webhooks and two different scenarios to call when the tools have finished. What I've done here is that I want to use actually the same scenario. So I've given them the same webhook address. And because this is a URL, we can use URL parameters, which means we can add additional information to give to that webhook. In this case, I've put in a key value pair with function is HTTP request, and here function is return company details. This is so we know which function has called the scenario, the toolbox scenario, and then we can use the router in that scenario to take the appropriate action. Now, the way a URL parameter works is that you have key value pairs preceded by a question mark directly pasted behind the URL. Additional key value pairs are preceded by an ampersand, and we can add as many key value pairs as we want. In this second function here, I've also added the information about what spreadsheet to use, what Google spreadsheet to use. Now we'll head over to that spreadsheet and start creating that next. Before creating the spreadsheet, let me quickly show you how the URL parameters are used. There's a router here, which has two filters. The first one is filtering on function being HTTP request, which then continues down the route of the web search. The second filter is looking for the function value of return company details. If this is true, it continues down the route of creating this Google Sheet. Next thing we'll do is to create the Google Sheet to populate our search results. I'll import a sheet that I got with my purchase. Now, if you didn't purchase this automation, you can create this yourself. The only thing to make sure of is that the columns correspond with the fields that we're picking in the automation scenario. What I'll do next is I'll select everything and I do format convert to table. Now here we see all the column names that we're going to use to populate the data into. And here at the bottom, we have the tab called result template. So when a new search result is generated, it will be generated in a new tab based on the template that is in the first tab. Two things to copy here. It's the ID of the spreadsheet, which is this long string here in the URL. This one here. And the second one to copy is the value behind the GAD key here. It's a shorter string of numbers. That's the ID for the tab. All right, back in make.com, we are here in our trigger scenario, and I've pasted the values that I've copied from the Google Sheet that we've just created. Now, this concludes the setup of these scenarios. We'll save this one and we'll go and test. Once this scenario has finished running, I can show you what the result was. Now, we've searched for a bakery in New York City, which we defined in our variables module. Then we've passed those search parameters to the SerpAPI service, which returned a number of results. We can look what these results look like for each company that it has found. It gives a rating out of 5, a description, and a name and a type of company. It also gives an address and GPS coordinates. Now we combine all this information, then we pass this to the openAI assistant. The openAI assistant will determine the website address of this company and then run the tools to search that website and find additional information if that can be found. Now to show you what this looks like in the toolbox scenario. Here we have an example of an HTTP request. A website URL was sent to the webhook, and because the function that we gave is the HTTP request, it goes to the router and it validates the HTTP request. Then it makes an HTTP request to that website address. It returns the HTML, parses it to text, and then returns it to the openAI assistant. In the final run of this scenario, we see that the company details have been returned by the openAI assistant. And these are all the companies that it has collected the information from, and it formatted that in the JSON format that we requested in the tool. It's then going through the router and going through the add to Google Sheet route. Now what it does is to connect to the Google Sheet, Google spreadsheet, then copy the template sheet and paste that data in that new copied sheet. All the values that are defined here are for each column that it needs to populate, which it takes from that JSON data. Now let's see what this looks like in our Google Sheet. You can see at the bottom here, there's a new tab that has been created based on this template, which has the same columns, except with the data populated. Now you can see that it has found some of the website URLs, it has found some of the email addresses, and it has found only one Instagram page. Now this is a bit depending on the company type, whether or not this information exists and can be found. This concludes the build of our local business finder automation. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like or a comment. I might update and improve this automation in the future, so if you want to keep up to date, subscribe to the channel and don't forget to visit doitive.shop. I'll see you in the next one.